Singapore's rich natural heritage is on display at the National Library. A new exhibition called Human Nature will help visitors understand the country's ecological narrative and how that's shaped our approach to nature today. Featured are loaned specimens of animals that used to be native to Singapore and a pair of binoculars belonging to the late conservation pioneer Subaraj Rajathurai. Also on display are 19th and 20th century books, illustrations and manuscripts documenting the island's flora and fauna. Visitors will also get insights on urbanization's impact on our natural environment and how the country is now trying to conserve and restore its natural landscape. For more, we're joined by Georgina Wong, curator of the exhibition, and Sankar, Ananthanarayanan from the Herpetological Society of Singapore. Good evening to both of you. Let's zoom in straight to this, the interesting pieces that we actually saw earlier. Georgina, there are a pair of binoculars belonging to late conservation pioneer Subaraj. There's also this Baroque monkey specimen as well. What significance do they hold in our environmental history?
Yeah, thank you, Don. So a lot of these items, we display them next to books in the showcases to represent different stories about our environmental history. And the Baroque monkey is one of my favorite stories because I think it represents a very different relationship that people used to have with nature that I think most of us don't have today. So the monkey that's on display is a southern pigtailed macaque, which was used by Henry Corner, who was the assistant director of the Singapore Botanic Gardens in the 1930s. And he was conducting a study of trees in Malaya, but had a hard time reaching the uppermost branches. So he trained monkeys from Kelantan who were traditionally trained to collect coconuts, but he brought them to Singapore and trained them to collect botanical specimens for him. And he wrote this book or a memoir called Botanical Monkeys, which we have on show as well with the specimen. And so it basically tells the story of how he trained these monkeys to collect specimens for him. And his first and favorite monkey, Mera, is rules the narrative of the book. And he describes training Mera by bribing him to go out to the trees and giving him free time in exchange for collecting specimens. So I think this is a really unique relationship with the natural world that, I don't think any of us will ever experience.
And what do we know, Georgina, of how people studied our natural environment back then and how much of that has influenced current conservation efforts?
So I think back then the study of natural history was very much limited to a lot of, in the region, a lot of European scientists who had control of publishing and who had control of what was considered science. A lot of them were studying the natural world, partly for scientific interest and partly for economic profit as well, as extending colonial rule in the region. But I think today our relationship with nature is very different. Definitely the study and appreciation of nature is much more democratic. I think it's really nice how lots of people are becoming more aware than ever about our natural wildlife and about how important nature is to us. I think it's really cool that people start things like, for example, the Herpetological Society, where they can just get together and share their shared passion for the environment.
And on that topic, Sankar, you are you co-founded the Herpetological Society. The work you do is so important for Singapore. It studies amphibians and reptiles. We've got loads of them here. Describe these animals' past and present relationship with Singapore.
Well, our relationship with reptiles and amphibians has certainly changed a lot in the last 100, 200 years. For one thing, climate change, habitat loss, these are all things that are consistently threatening reptiles and amphibians throughout the region and in Singapore with increasing urbanization. But at the same time, it's also very heartening to see some species doing well in our urban environment as well. So at the Human Nature exhibition, at the very beginning, there's actually a hawksbill sea turtle specimen that is on loan from the Lee Kong Chian National History Museum. So the hawksbill sea turtle actually used to be endangered, very endangered, because it was hunted almost to extinction for its shell. The shell was actually used for tortoise shell, for ornamentation. And today, because the tortoiseshell industry is largely phased out, hawksbill sea turtles are not as critically endangered. Instead, we actually happen to have hawksbill sea turtles nesting on our local shores, even on artificial shores like the East Coast Park. So I think it's really interesting how reptiles and amphibians particularly have constantly been at flux with us, and the relationship with humans and our relationship with biodiversity is just constantly changing, which is very interesting to see in this exhibition.
Yeah, that's an encouraging story as well with these turtles. But looking wider into Singapore, and given all the development that is continually ongoing, animals here must be in danger, aren't they?
Well, yeah. There is a lot of threat that comes with urbanization, and that, like, for one thing, you see many animals, falling prey to roadkill, and that's something that needs to be studied and needs to be prioritized with urban planning as well. But it's important to realize that at the end of the day, the biggest thing that threatens most of these animals is ignorance, especially for reptiles and amphibians. They suffer from a lack of understanding. Many people tend to think of snakes, of frogs, of reptiles, of lizards as scary or unnecessary, when actually they are very important aspects of our ecosystem, of our larger ecosystem in Singapore. So I think the first step really in kind of helping these animals out would be to increase our understanding of the fact that Singapore does have a lot of biodiversity, much of which is overlooked, many of which are feared for no reason except that they don't look as cuddly as a panda, for example.
And Georgina, to Sankar's point there about possible ignorance, we could all do with more education when it comes to environmental conservation. How do Singaporeans fare in terms of knowing just how to go about being, sort of careful about the environment?
I think that public awareness, especially lately, has increased a lot in society. People are more aware than ever, I think, of different ways to approach human-wildlife interactions. And I agree that public education, I think, is really, really key when it comes to us appreciating and caring for nature. Which is why, part of the exhibition as well, we mentioned the binoculars earlier. So we wanted to pay homage to Subaraj, who's a conservation pioneer. He was one of the key people who was involved in conserving Sungai Buloh, right? And one of his hallmarks was public education. I think a lot of Singaporeans probably remember him for his nature walks. And so I think things like that, going into nature, just learning more and exploring more about the environment will help all of us, improve our conversations and our relationship with nature overall.
Well, thank you very much, Georgina. Sankar. We've been speaking there to Georgina Wong at the National Library Board and Sankar Ananthanarayanan, President and co-founder of the Herpetological Society of Singapore. The exhibition, Human Nature, runs for about 6 months from today at the National Library.